Good evening. Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. 1,500 meters of granite, blast doors weighing 25 tons each. Air filtration systems designed to sustain operations during nuclear attack. And deep inside this hardened facility, inside the operations center where officers monitor threats to North American security continuously, systems triggered. Not single system failure, not isolated sensor anomaly. Multiple systems, converging alerts, patterns that crossed thresholds programmed into detection networks, specifically to warn when adversary behavior shifts from routine to potentially threatening. The alerts did not indicate missile launches, did not show nuclear detonations, but indicated something else, something perhaps more concerning in its ambiguity. Russian military activity that does not match known operational patterns. Activity that creates signatures. American early warning architecture is designed to detect, but that interpretation of those signatures remains uncertain. And uncertainty at strategic level, uncertainty about adversary intent when adversary possesses nuclear weapons, is precisely what early warning systems exist to minimize. But minimizing requires understanding, and understanding requires that adversary behavior fits models. When behavior deviates from models, understanding fails and uncertainty returns. The first alerts came from radar installations monitoring Russian aerospace activities. Ground-based radars in Alaska and Greenland that track objects in flight. Space-based infrared satellites that detect heat signatures from engines and exhausts. These systems constantly monitor Russian territory, monitor for missile launches, monitor for aircraft departures from strategic bomber bases, monitor for any activity suggesting preparation for operations against North America. Standard monitoring, continuous monitoring, and monitoring normally produces routine data. Aircraft taking off for training, missiles tested within known ranges, activity consistent with peacetime operations of nuclear-armed military maintaining readiness without signaling hostile intent. But the data changed. Radar returns showed aircraft activity at Russian strategic bomber bases, not activity inconsistent with exercises, but activity timed strangely, occurring during hours when exercises typically do not occur, occurring without advance notifications that Russia normally provides through military-to-military channels, occurring in patterns suggesting not isolated flights but coordinated operations across multiple bases. And coordination without notification forces American analysts to ask whether coordination is benign or whether it represents something requiring heightened readiness. Infrared satellites added concerning dimension. Heat signatures from Russian facilities that house strategic systems showed increases, not massive increases suggesting imminent launch, but increases consistent with increased activity, with more personnel present, with more systems powered up, with operations occurring at intensity above normal baseline. Infrared monitoring cannot determine what specific activities generate heat, cannot distinguish between maintenance and operational preparation, can only detect that heat levels changed and that changes suggest something different is occurring even if what that something is remains unclear. Signals intelligence provided the most concerning indicators. Russian command networks showed encrypted traffic volumes spiking, messages flowing during periods when traffic normally remains minimal, communications between facilities that do not routinely coordinate directly, and message patterns matching formats associated with operational directives rather than administrative routine. Signals intelligence cannot decrypt Russian military communications in real time, cannot read message contents to determine intent, but can analyze traffic patterns, can identify when communication behaviors change, can assess whether changes suggest routine variation or whether changes indicate shift toward operational posture that peacetime environments normally do not require. The convergence is what triggered serious concern. Single anomaly can be dismissed. Radar glitch, satellite misinterpretation, communications exercise. But when radar shows unusual activity and simultaneously infrared detects increased heat and simultaneously signals intelligence captures elevated traffic, convergence suggests reality, suggests Russian military is doing something coordinated, something occurring without transparency, something American early warning systems detected but cannot fully characterize. And inability to characterize creates the strategic problem, creates requirement to prepare for possibilities that may not materialize but cannot be ignored when consequences of ignoring them could be catastrophic. From Moscow's perspective, whatever activity triggered these alerts may serve completely legitimate purposes, may represent exercises conducted without notification, because notification is courtesy, not requirement, may represent maintenance occurring at unusual times, because scheduling flexibility serves operational needs, may represent routine coordination that appears unusual only because American monitoring lacks complete context. But from American perspective, Russian intent cannot be verified, can only observe behavior and prepare for possibilities that observable behavior suggests. And when behavior suggests increased activity at strategic facilities during unusual times without notification, defensive planning must assume hostile possibilities even while hoping for benign explanations. Inside U.S. Strategic Command headquarters, the alert triggered immediate response protocols. Duty officers notified chain of command within minutes. Watch centers elevated monitoring. Analysts began intensive review of all available intelligence to determine whether additional indicators exist that might clarify Russian intent. And senior commanders convened to assess whether alert requires changes in American force posture, requires increasing readiness of strategic forces, requires preparing for scenarios where Russian activity represents preparation for operations requiring American counter-response. The uncertainty creates the dilemma. If alert indicates Russian preparation for aggressive action, then American delay in responding could leave U.S. forces poorly positioned. But if alert represents false alarm or misinterpretation of routine Russian activities, then American response could itself appear provocative, could trigger Russian counter-response to American actions they interpret as threatening, could initiate escalation spiral where both sides respond to perceived threats that neither side originally intended to create, but that mutual fear and miscalculation combine to generate despite rational desires to avoid confrontation. Early warning systems exist precisely to provide time to verify information, time to assess intent, time to consult with allies, time to explore diplomatic channels before military responses become necessary. But time depends on clarity. When alerts are clear, when signatures match known patterns, when intent is obvious, time exists to verify and decide deliberately. But when alerts are ambiguous, when signatures do not match models, when intent cannot be determined, time compresses because worst-case assumptions force preparation for possibilities that may be unlikely, but carry consequences too severe to risk ignoring. NATO allies received notifications through military channels within hours, not public announcements, not diplomatic statements, restricted military communications informing Allied defense officials that American early warning systems detected unusual Russian activity. That activity does not currently indicate imminent threat, but that activity warrants increased attention, and that alliance members should review their own readiness postures to ensure preparation for scenarios where Russian activity represents preparation for operations affecting NATO security. European capitals responded with mix of concern and skepticism. Concern because Russian military activity affecting American early warning systems necessarily affects European security. Skepticism because alerts without clear explanation create uncertainty about whether situation is genuinely serious or whether American systems are overinterpreting routine Russian operations. And uncertainty affects how allies respond. Some elevate their own monitoring. Some wait for additional information. Division in Allied responses is exactly what adversaries exploit when they create situations where threat is ambiguous and responses must be calibrated against incomplete understanding. Military planners immediately began scenario modeling. What if Russian activity represents preparation for operations? What capabilities might Russia be positioning? What American responses are available? What timeframes exist for implementation? And modeling revealed familiar, uncomfortable truth. American responses require time. Time to move forces. Time to coordinate with allies. Time to build political support. But if Russian preparation is rapid, if operations could commence before American counterpositioning completes, then time available may be less than time required. And that gap between available time and required time is where strategic vulnerability exists. Intelligence agencies launched intensive collection efforts, tasking every available asset to gather additional information about Russian activities, repositioning reconnaissance satellites, increasing signals intelligence coverage, activating human sources who might provide insight into Russian intentions. Because understanding intent is critical. If Russian activity is benign, intensive American response wastes resources and risks escalation. But if Russian activity is hostile preparation, inadequate American response risks being caught unprepared during crisis. And determining which possibility is real requires intelligence that may not exist or may not be obtainable in time frames that decisions require. The technical analysis of alert signatures consumed analysts for hours, reviewing every data point, comparing against historical baselines, searching for precedents where similar signatures appeared and what they ultimately meant. And analysis revealed disturbing pattern. Russian military has been gradually changing operational behaviors over months, changes too small individually to trigger alerts, but changes that cumulatively represent shift in how Russian strategic forces operate, shift toward patterns that create more ambiguity, that generate more signatures that do not fit models, that force American analysts to operate with less certainty about Russian activities and intentions. This pattern suggests deliberate Russian strategy to operate in ways that complicate American early warning, that create ambiguity forcing American defensive responses, even when Russian activities may not be immediately threatening, that test American systems to determine thresholds, that gather intelligence about American response patterns, and strategy succeeds even when Russian activities prove benign because success is measured not in operations executed, but in American responses generated, in resources diverted, in attention consumed, in political capital expended preparing for threats that may not materialize, but that Russian ambiguity forced America to prepare for anyway. From strategic perspective, this creates asymmetric advantage for Russia. Russian activities that are relatively low cost, that may represent routine operations conducted without particular intent to threaten, generate American responses that are high cost. That require mobilizing intelligence assets. That requires senior official attention. That require coordination across government and with allies. And if Russia can generate expensive American responses through cheap Russian activities, Russia achieves favorable cost-exchange ratio that serves Russian interests regardless of whether Russian activities had hostile intent. But from American perspective, cost of responding is unavoidable, because cost of not responding when threat is real exceeds any cost of responding when threat proves false. Nuclear-armed adversaries cannot be given benefit of doubt when their activities generate signatures suggesting potential preparation for operations, must respond to possibilities even when probabilities remain uncertain, must prepare for worst case even while hoping for best case. And preparation requires resources, requires attention, requires political will, that Russia may be deliberately targeting through strategy of ambiguous activities that force expensive American responses. The psychological dimension affects decision-making profoundly. When early warning systems alert, when signatures suggest potential threats, when uncertainty is high, decision-makers experience pressure. Pressure to act decisively, pressure to demonstrate readiness, pressure to avoid appearing weak or unprepared, but simultaneously pressure to avoid overreaction, pressure to maintain calm, pressure to avoid escalation, and these opposing pressures create stress that affects judgment. That can lead to decisions made too quickly without adequate information, or decisions delayed too long while threats mature. Managing these pressures requires discipline, requires institutional processes that prevent either overreaction or underreaction, requires leadership capable of operating effectively under sustained uncertainty. Tonight, Russian activities that triggered alerts continue. American monitoring remains intensive. Allied consultations proceed through military channels, and across U.S. national security apparatus, officials and officers operate under heightened awareness that situation may be nothing, or may be something, but that determining which requires time that may not be available if Russian intent is hostile. This is the burden of strategic warning. This is the challenge of maintaining readiness without triggering escalation. This is the impossible balance where preparation seems prudent, but also seems potentially provocative depending on how adversary interprets American actions. The early warning architecture American strategy depends on is sophisticated, is comprehensive, monitors multiple domains through multiple sensor types, processes vast amounts of data continuously, applies algorithms designed to identify patterns indicating threats. But architecture has limits, cannot determine intent from observation, cannot predict future actions from current postures, cannot provide certainty when adversaries deliberately create ambiguity. And limits mean that even best early warning systems provide warnings that require interpretation, that demand judgment, that force decisions under uncertainty. The serious consequences the alerts indicated are not immediate operational threats, are not Russian forces attacking, are not missiles launching, but are something potentially more concerning in long term. Are indications that Russian military is evolving how it operates, is learning to function in ways that complicate American detection and characterization, is testing systematically to determine American response thresholds, is gathering intelligence about American systems and procedures, and if Russian capabilities to operate ambiguously continue improving, if American ability to characterize Russian activities continues degrading, then future crises may unfold with even less warning, with even more uncertainty, with even greater pressure on decision-makers who must judge threats without adequate information. Washington recalibrates under this recognition, recalibrates expectations about warning time, recalibrates confidence in detection capabilities, recalibrates assumptions about how much advance notice will exist before crises become acute. And recalibration is uncomfortable because it means accepting that comfortable assumptions that provided sense of security are less valid than believed, that adversaries are more capable than estimated, that challenges ahead are more difficult than previous planning acknowledged. The strategic competition continues. Russia operates. America monitors. Both sides understand that competition occurs across multiple dimensions, including dimension of ambiguity and uncertainty. Russia seeks to create ambiguity that complicates American responses. America seeks to penetrate ambiguity to maintain understanding that enables effective responses. This competition has no clear endpoints, no decisive victories, only ongoing efforts where each side probes the other's capabilities and limitations, where advantages shift based on technical innovations, on operational adaptations, on strategic insights that one side achieves before the other recognizes the change occurred. Tonight, early warning systems remain on heightened alert. Russian activities continue generating signatures that require monitoring and analysis. American forces maintain readiness postures calibrated to current assessments of threat levels. Allied nations coordinate through established channels. And the recognition settles across national security community that the strategic environment just became slightly more uncertain, slightly more dangerous, slightly less forgiving of errors or miscalculations, not because dramatic crisis erupted, but because routine monitoring revealed that adversary is evolving, is adapting, is becoming more sophisticated in how it operates and challenges American security. And evolution of threats requires evolution of responses, requires maintaining vigilance, requires accepting that comfortable assumptions must constantly be questioned, requires operating under sustained uncertainty, where clarity is rare and decisions must be made despite imperfect information about adversary capabilities and intentions. U.S. early warning systems flagged Russian move with serious consequences. Consequences not of immediate crisis, but of long-term challenge to American strategic warning capabilities. Consequences that demand recalibration of assumptions. Consequences that require accepting that adversaries learn, that threats evolve, that systems designed for yesterday's challenges may be inadequate for tomorrow's reality. The alert sounded, the response mobilized, and the burden of strategic competition continues, requiring constant vigilance, constant adaptation, constant acceptance that certainty in great power rivalry is illusion, and that operating effectively under uncertainty is the only option available when adversaries possess capabilities to destroy civilization and intentions that cannot be verified with confidence but must be prepared for, because consequences of being wrong exceed any costs of being prudent.